Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Slime Files, where we look at all the stuff that I forgot to publish throughout the years. Today, we're going to be looking at some explosions, and yeah, this episode applies to both Java and Bedrock. So, ignoring that this is definitely not my first take anymore. Anyways, so I think we've all done the thing where you go into creative, you drill a hole all the way down to Bedrock, and then you fill it up with TNT. Uh, and then you light it up. And if we watch closely, hopefully the thing happened. Yep, it happened to some extent. Uh, as you can see, you get a lot of TNT flying up into the air, and this is a really fun thing to watch. It's quite a spectacular display. Um, I made sure that this was away from any caves, so all these extra holes on the side, those were created by the TNTs. And, I mean, I'll put it this way. If you had to give a number, uh, accurate to within, like, a couple of blocks, what would you even say the diameter of this hole is? That's that kind of says how bad of a hole making method this is. And also, you often get a bunch of TNT flying up into the air. And if you're lucky, it just gets wasted. If you're unlucky, it destroys something you wanted to keep. So, yeah, this is just a really terrible way of digging a hole. And I'm pretty sure everybody knew that. Now, the reason this doesn't work very well is because TNT has a very low blast resistance, so once this one explodes, it's going to ignite several at the same time, and that chain is just going to continue and get worse as it goes on. Well, maybe not get worse, but uh, you'll end up with several TNT entities all at once, all the way through, and they'll push each other around. That's how you get these side holes, that's how you get them flying up into the air. Now, one way of controlling it, if you don't value your time or mental well-being, would be to manually place and ignite every TNT. I have the game sped up a lot, because as it turns out, as of 1.18, if you started at sea level and went all the way down to bedrock doing this, you would spend 8 minutes of your life just waiting for TNT to explode, and you have to make sure it's in the center each time, which may start to get a little confusing. There are also, of course, plenty of machines out there that have been designed that drops the TNT in, or it does all the TNT management for you. But sometimes you want a method that doesn't require that much thinking or anything. You just want to fill up the hole, light it up, and be done with it. So what we need is a way to stage the TNT in a way where we can properly control when each of them ignite. And one way you could do this would be using observers, uh, because once you ignite it, they all ignite at roughly the same time, and the observers also hold them in place. And it creates a very beautiful effect. But I mean, it has a few problems. The first big problem being that uh, so either you have to construct it from the top down, or you have to jump back down in order to ignite it, just because of how the observers work. Like, if you did this and then ignited this one, it wouldn't set off the chain, right? Well, let's actually take a look and see what happens. As you can see, each TNT exploded one by one, and I knew that would happen because observers have a very specific blast resistance that makes it so that a TNT explosion will always break an observer and a TNT after that, but it will never have enough explosion strength to then break another observer after that. Of course, observers might be a little bit too expensive for you, so there are plenty of other options available with the exact same blast resistance. For example, lapis blocks, only lapis blocks though, not iron blocks or gold blocks. Um, there's also every kind of ore except ancient debris and gilded blackstone, if you consider those ores. You could also use beacons and conduits, or If you're feeling really eccentric, you can use any type of wooden planks or their upper slab variants. You can only use the top slabs because the bottoms will very readily absorb most of the explosion. Anyways, we see that if you fill your hole with both wooden planks and TNT, you are left with a much cleaner hole than with TNT alone. Look at that hole. Now that's a good hole. So wooden planks let us stage the TNT every second block, but what if we wanted to go every third block or something? Well, the idea would still remain the same. We would want to have blocks in between that, where it would be when this TNT explodes, it'll break every block up to and including this TNT, but never have enough explosion power to break the next block. And we have kind of this balancing act to do, and at least from my experience, it's best to err on the side of not breaking enough blocks, because then you can just reignite it if you need to, but if it's breaking too many blocks, then it can creep forward and eventually explode two TNTs at once. Now, because we want the explosion to reach the TNT, but not go any further, it's best for us to invest as much blast resistance into this very next block as possible. And we find that even though these don't have a very different blast resistance, using a wool and a pumpkin works pretty well. Let's actually see it in action. We'll also speed up the game just to go faster. And as you can see, it also works pretty well, except now it's a little more clean. It's still kind of a 3x3 hole, just without as many blocks on the sides. Now, as is the case with being able to use upper wooden slabs instead of just wood planks, we also have some alternatives here. Instead of wool, you could use sandstone, or also any other color of wool, and also either type of sandstone, including upper sandstone slabs. You could also use stairs, but it's the same amount of resources. For pumpkins, instead you could use melons. I mean, it's the same thing, but slower to farm. Or you can use either type of wart block. At least from what I can tell, there aren't really any other better options than these blocks, though. Oh, and by the way, you don't have to worry about trying to memorize all of the block combinations and the block alternatives. I am gonna put all of that in the description as just a nice little resource for everyone. So we can stage the TNT every second block or every third block. What about every fourth block? Well, as it turns out, we can do that as well. However, it starts to stretch things a bit thin. Well, as it turns out, there are actually a few different combinations of blast resistances that work similarly well to each other. You could use moss, snow, netherrack, moss, dirt, scaffolding, moss, gravel, or scaffolding, mangrove roots. And as before, these blocks do have some alternatives. For scaffolding, you could use slime. In theory, honey would work. I mean, it has the right blast resistance, but it's not exactly ideal for pillaring with. Moving on, snow, you could use leaves. Instead of, okay, so grass actually does not work, so let's put in coarse dirt. Okay, coarse dirt also works, as well as sand and ice. Instead of gravel, you can use clay, though now unfortunately moss, netherrack, and mangrove roots don't have any good alternatives. Moss, you could use carpet, and then you just have to use jump boost, like with a beacon or a potion, which at that point, I mean, it's more set up. But meanwhile, because the netherrack and mangrove roots are used as the top, they don't really have an alternative. Like, rails have the same blast resistance as mangrove roots, but you end up with the same problem as with the bottom slabs. If you do that, it'll drop in and it'll get absorbed. Meanwhile, if you replace the moss with carpet, uh, it just lands on the dirt anyways, and you're fine. Now, unfortunately, when you want to stage it every fourth block, it's at this point being stretched thin enough that without having some of the blocks just be air, we can't actually reliably make sure that uh, we always break the TNT and never break the next block. So all of these err on the side of making sure that that next block never gets broken, while pushing their luck as much as you can, if that makes sense. However, if you are okay with reigniting it more often, you could use snow netherrack, or scaffolding wool, or use any of the alternative blocks as discussed before. However, out of all of these, my favorites would have to be, well, first, the snow netherrack, simply because netherrack you definitely have too much of, and snow is very easy to farm. Not only that, but both of these have been around since the alpha days, so it'll work in pretty much any other version. The other favorite of mine would have to be 2 moss and an ice block, as later on in a technical server world, both of these blocks are going to be very much not in short supply. So now let's actually finally go ahead and test this thing out. We'll see that um, now it digs a very clean 3x3 hole, occasionally leaving a block in the corner, though as I mentioned before, every once in a while it drops the explosion. Also, caves, oh wow, that was really close to that water, and also ores or gravel or anything will also cause it to no longer have a nice explosion. So we can stage the TNT every second block, or every third block, or every fourth block, and based on the fact that every fourth block it starts to be unreliable, I haven't even considered figuring it out for every fifth block. Not to mention that, I mean, some of these options straight up use blocks with 0 blast resistance. How much further can you go? But what if we were to try to stage it every 1 block? Is this possible? Well, actually, it is. But we just have to put 2 blocks per layer. So to do this, the idea would be that we have 2 columns, which, I mean, a lot of people like to dig that 2-column hole anyway, so I guess that works out. But the idea here is this TNT will break this block, but because we are using an even stronger block this time than wood, it won't be able to break this TNT after that. But because this one's diagonally there, I mean, the explosion originates near the bottom, so, I mean, it still doesn't have to go through that much stone in order to reach this TNT in order to ignite it. And so, after that, it'll just, swap sides, and they just take turns. However, here we get into a parity difference. So over here on bedrock, you can use cobblestone. However, this block right here, you have to make sure that it is not there. Just because of how the explosions work. However, you could also use diorite or regular stone, or there's a lot of other options. However, as you can see, deep slate does not quite work. Meanwhile, back on Java, having this block here, I mean, you can have it there or not. It doesn't really matter. That won't break it. But what will break it is using any material that isn't end stone. So on Java, this is honestly not worth it. If you include mining the end stone, like, it's going to be faster to just do 2 wood towers. And speaking of which, that is something that you can always consider, is using multiple of these. And I find that doing multiple actually tends to produce cleaner results overall. However, it has one major disadvantage, and that is liquids. You see, if liquids spill into this thing while it's exploding, then one of two things can happen. If it's the very first explosion tower you're doing, then if the liquids catch up, they'll just simply stop the current TNT, and that's it. You then remove the liquid and continue. However, if this is not the first tower you're doing, and the water catches up, it'll simply go past and start covering up whichever wall it's hiding and therefore blocking that explosion. However, I do find that the 4 tower is perfectly capable of keeping up with liquids and just going faster than they can fall. The 3 tower, it's generally around neck and neck, but for the every second block tower, the liquids catch up very easily. Oh, and of course, if you do it with every fourth block, it might even just stop all on its own. Who knows? And with that, you are hereby certified to not only put holes in pumpkins with iron tools, but holes in iron using pumpkin tools.
Thank you for making it to the end of the video. YouTube Analytics tells me that only 7.8% of the first million natural numbers are actually prime. So let's see if we can change that. If it's not too much to ask, I would also love it if you were to subscribe to 2 and H2O. And until next time,